everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Today I want us to look at the concept theory and conceptual framework as used in research. We may need to begin with theory. I wish to state that theory can be generally understood as a framework that is used by scholars or researchers to analyze why social phenomena occur. Theories are largely grouped into broad and narrow theories. Broad theories are generally utilized when we seek to understand issues that are of broader concern to society. However, we use micro theories when we want to understand the smaller issues within society. For instance, if we generally want to understand broader issues in the family, we can easily use or apply grand theories or what we call macro theories. But when we want to understand a particular issue within the family, for instance, violence in the family, then we may apply micro issues. Now, with regard to research, every research is required to apply theory, and the application of theory in research is guided by 1. The study objectives, and 2. the aim of study. While it is not a rule that researchers have to use more than one theory, but it is, however, advisable that the number of theories a researcher decides to use are those that adequately corresponds to the issues that researcher seeks to answer in all the research objectives. That way, therefore, if in your analysis of the theory that you have at hand, you notice that that theory can only address issues that concerns you in objective 1 and 2, then it is advisable that you apply another theory to respond to the issues that maybe you have in objective 3 and 4. However, one important thing that you must observe when applying more than one theory is that you have to adequately explain the linkage between theory 1 and theory 2. In particular, you have to clearly state what you think are the issues or the limitations of theory 1 that you think can be strengthened by theory 2. And therefore, theory 1 and theory 2 must be those that complement each other. That's necessary. Once you have decided on the theories that you want to use, and now you want to apply them in a study, it is advisable that you follow the following guidelines. 1, you are required to state when and who is behind the theory. In other words, who are the authors or the proponents of the theory? Secondly, when was the theory founded? Number 2, you must explain the main arguments of the theory. For instance, what are the main propositions that the theory puts forward? They could be 1, 2, or 3. Once you have informed us about what the propositions of the theory are, the next step that you need to engage in is now apply those theories to a study. Read carefully each of the propositions and then explain how that proposition addresses the issues that you seek to find out in your objectives. Once you have done that, then you're also required to identify possible weaknesses or criticisms that other scholars or other studies have highlighted about the theory, and then try to address those criticisms so that they may not come out as points of weaknesses in your study. Once you have that, then you're going to go. With regard to conceptual framework, it is required first that you explain what a conceptual framework is, and then secondly, try to show the relationship between the various variables in your study. Perhaps we need to begin by what we mean by conceptual framework. Conceptual framework generally refers to the mental construct that a researcher has with regard to how he or she perceives the various variables in the study will relate to each other. When we talk of variables, we simply mean items or issues that do not have a fixed value. They vary. That's the meaning of variable. For instance, age is a variable, income is a variable, gender is a variable, rank in employment is a variable, among others. Now, studies can have as many variables as possible. However, there are two key variables that must underpin each study. One of them is what we call independent variable, and the other one is dependent variable. Independent variable refers to a variable that affects other variables. In other words, they affect the change in other variables. While independent variable, rather dependent variable, refers to those variables whose outcome is affected by other variables. In any study, you need to have independent variable and dependent variable. The question is, how many independent variables or dependent variables should a study have? The answer to this question rather depends on how well a particular study and its objectives are structured. Otherwise, a well-conceptualized and structured study should have two main variables. These are independent variable and dependent variable. While constructing your conceptual framework, before constructing your conceptual framework, you need to come up with what we call descriptive variables. In other words, in each of the independent variables and dependent variables, you must come up with measurable items under them. In other words, the items that describes the independent variable and the dependent variable that the study seeks to perceive. For instance, assuming I'm interested at investigating the influence of level of education on remuneration. In this case, level of education determines the remuneration, and remuneration depends on one's level of education. So in this case, level of education is our independent variable, and income or remuneration is our dependent variable. Level of education, we can categorize it into its constituent parts, starting either from the lowest or from the highest. Assuming we start with the highest, then we can say that any individual can acquire different levels of education, and these are, it could be university level of education, it could be college level of education, it could be second level of education, it could be primary level of education, or the individual might not have attended any formal education, and therefore it is no formal education. So the various level of education that we have outlined in our case are now what we call the descriptive variables. Now, with regard to income or remuneration, we might also decide and categorize remuneration into different aspects. For instance, can use Likert scale to say very low, low, somehow low, high, and very high. Or we could create what we call salary bands, maybe less than 5,000 as one band. The next band could be 5,001 to say 10,000, 10,001 to say 15,000, and so on and so forth. So the link that we have between the various levels of education and the remuneration an employee receives, the linkage, our conceptualization of the linkage in that case is what we call conceptual framework. In other words, we are conceptualizing that a given level of education will determine a given level of remuneration on the employees. Thank you so much for that.